Typical Cirrus pilot. That's what he said. There I was, day 2 of recurrent training. We were discussing an incident someone from the class had brought up that led to a pilot deviation, and, I was a little bit insulted. I mean, I fly Cirruses, right? What do you mean? My friend has bought one too. I think it's awesome. But a little part of me actually kind of knew what the guy meant. And it got me thinking, what is it with Cirruses anyway? Of all the aircraft types out there, why is it that they seem to have a stereotype all to themselves? Why is it that so many preventable accidents seem to involve them? I mean, especially for an airplane with a ballistic recovery chute attached to it, right? But before all you Cirrus drivers fire up the hate mail function on your Android phones, just let me explain. Because as it pertains to Cirruses, well, I actually quite like them. Really. So don't worry, this episode isn't going to be a bag on Cirruses fest. Although some say it probably could be. Because we all know there's a stereotype surrounding them, and maybe even a stigma in some circles. And if you ask me, they've sort of taken over from the Bonanza as this generation's way of killing doctors. For the record though, I also like Bonanzas. Oh, and doctors. Anyway, I'm Brandon Gonzalez. This is Podcasting on a Plane, and today, that's what we're talking about. Maybe a day or two after the conversation in my class, my man Max Trescott tweeted out that AOPA Air Safety had recently posted a new video on YouTube, and it was about a Cirrus crash in Houston. And before watching it, he said he already knew which one it was. So anyway, I took that as a recommendation. I sat down to watch it, and I was immediately hooked. And not just because it was another well-made AOPA air safety video, but because as I watched, I was fascinated by how the interaction with air traffic played into the situation. And now you're speaking my language. If you aren't already familiar, AOPA's Air Safety Institute does so much in the realm of safety training and accident investigation reporting and interactive training. And if you're not a member of AOPA, it's okay, because they actually put a lot of it for free on YouTube. And it isn't boring blah, blah, safety this, safety that, don't ever have any kind of fun kind of stuff. If you ask me, AOPA wants you to have fun. I mean, after all, general aviation advocacy, that's a central pillar of their very existence, right? And so they make these videos, and they pick apart a disaster, and they really get to the meat of what happened. The videos are well produced, and every time I watch one, I come away feeling enlightened. So this is YouTube, and of course, you can't just watch one video. So I watched a few more, and I found another one with striking similarity. And again, the interaction with air traffic control, it played an interesting part. Now, ATC didn't play a causal role per se, but we're going to listen to it, and you're going to see what I mean. But here, of course, is where things get complicated. I knew I had to make an episode about it, and as I sat down to record this one, it quickly became apparent that I didn't just want to do it solo. It also became apparent that it's hard to be in the position of a pilot, controller, podcaster who's about to make an episode where we get into the nitty-gritty about fatal accidents. Because no matter what I wrote down, I just felt weird. Because I don't want to judge another controller's actions. I don't want to play armchair quarterback to the pilot, and it wasn't really obvious how to handle that. But I know how important talking about some of this stuff is, so I sat down to make the episode anyway and just kind of see where it went. But instead of doing it solo, I decided to bring in the only co-host I know who's uniquely qualified to do the job. The very guy who brought all this to my attention in the first place. My friend Max Trescott. Max, thanks for doing the show with me today, man.
Brandon, pleasure to be here.
All right, well, before we start, I want to just take a second to give you a quick nod of respect for all that you do in the GA community, not just as a CFI, but as a seasoned podcaster and an author of books that have helped, countless pilots master complicated concepts and systems like the G1000, and most importantly, for helping uphold the good name of the Cirrus aircraft type, which is a topic we're going to get pretty deep into today.
Well, it is my favorite airplane to fly, so sure, happy to talk about it.
I don't blame you. I love them too. For anybody listening out there, I'm sure most of you don't really need a big briefing on Max. You probably know him, but just in case, Max, let's go through your bio here real quick. So you're a full-time flight instructor, and you started flying at age 15 and finished your certificate in college, where you got degrees in electrical engineering, psychology, and an MBA, and then spent 25 years working in sales and marketing for Hewlett-Packard?
Well, that sounds about right. Can't believe I'm that old, though.
So in 2004, though, you decided to leave that life and then devote your all your time to teaching, flying, writing, and giving speeches and seminars. And you wrote a bunch of books like the G1000 Handbook that I think pretty much everyone knows you for, which is in, it's 5th edition now. And then you got ATPs in every airplane category there is?
Yes, that's right. I'm finding I'm having a heck of a lot more fun in my second career than I did some of the years that I was working in high tech. I mean, a lot of those were good years, but oh my gosh, it is so much fun to be out there, in an airplane, just looking around, watching the world go by. I can tell you, I spent many years in conference room watching the clouds go by, and this is much better.
I bet. Is that how you ended up in the Bay Area?
Oh, the headquarters for HP was here, so I moved out here after about 7 years, and I traveled through all 50 states, and I've seen a lot of the U.S., and I just love this area more than any other area. It's fantastic weather, really interesting terrain, great people. Plus, as a little bit of a nerd, it was easy for me to be able to run down and buy any electronic component I needed for a project I was working on.
That's amazing. So now, of course, you specialize in teaching Cirrus aircraft, and most recently, their new flagship product, the SF-50 Vision Jet. You still have wet ink on your type rating, don't you?
Oh, I sure do. I just finished that up about 10 days ago, and that was a fantastic experience. That was 10 days in Knoxville, Tennessee. They do the training in the simulator now, though I did get to fly the jet for about an hour because there's one part of the training that they can't do in the simulator. All I can tell you is it's an amazing jet. I've typed in a couple of other jets, and I've taught in citations as well. It's just, it's so well designed. It's really breathtaking.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Cirrus is really known for is pushing the envelope with design into, the current century. And I remember when Cirrus, the originals, the SR-20 was getting developed and just how different it was to everything that we were used to that was made out of metal. Now, in 2008, you got named as the National CFI of the Year. What's that like?
Well, it doesn't mean I'm the best flight instructor, but it does mean that I was selected by the FAA to represent all 96,000 flight instructors here in the U.S. And there's a long selection process and committee and so on. And I think they probably felt that, since I was doing more than just teaching, that maybe I could be a role model and also in the process encourage other people to become flight instructors and to just shine a little bit more light on the flight instructor community. I think that flight instructors are really the backbone of aviation. Nobody gets their license without a lot of help from multiple flight instructors, and yet I don't think they get the recognition they deserve. But I also think that just as I wasn't really thinking about becoming a flight instructor, I got lucky. Somebody said, hey, you should do that. Turned out they were right. And I want to be that person to kind of let other people kind of start thinking about it and go, maybe I should become a flight instructor.
Well, as one of the 96,000 CFIs that there apparently are in the U.S., hey, I'm proud to have you represent us. So nice job. Well done. Now,
Thanks.
Looking back on your bio here, this is so fun because as I read, you started flying at age 15. I started flying around that age too. You finished your certificate in college, as did I. Got a degree in something a little different than flying, just like I did. I didn't spend 25 years in sales, but I spent a couple of them in there. And now you and I both have aviation podcasts, and yours is a weekly one. It's focused on general aviation, and you specialize mostly in general aviation news from around the world, plus skills and tips and stuff like that. What's your show called again, Max?
It's called Aviation News Talk.
And where can people find that?
You can find it just about any place you would find podcasts. So wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can probably find Aviation News Talk there as well. I've also put together a couple of dedicated apps for folks who are just not as knowledgeable about podcasts. They can now find my show by just going into the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and download the dedicated app.
Amazing. So today on the agenda, if you're game for it, I was thinking we could pick apart a couple of kind of recent and well-known Cirrus crashes. And I picked two in particular because not only because they're serious fatal accidents, unfortunately, but in each case, air traffic control played an interesting part in each one. Not a causal role necessarily, but it was definitely a key part in each incident. They both happened under similar circumstances, basically a stall spin. And as we read the NTSB reports, we're going to see how those interactions with ATC were kind of key in playing out one way or another with events that lead up to the occurrence. And of course, Cirrus's and air traffic control, well, that's where our worlds are going to overlap. The AOPA Air Safety Institute, who we all know does amazing case study videos, recently put out some videos on the two accidents we're going to talk about today. And I recommend everybody go take a look at them. There will be links, of course, in the show notes. Max, you recently tweeted about one of them, and I saw the tweet you put out, and of course I went and watched the video immediately, and it was the more recent of the two, and this one occurred at Houston Hobby Airport, and you mentioned in your tweet that the second you saw it, you already knew which accident it was. Is that right?
So I'm an active member of COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association, and they've got forums online where all of these accidents and incidents, no matter how small, really get talked about in detail. And so that's one of the benefits of belonging to COPA is that you hear about these things immediately, but then you also get a lot of inside information and analysis and helps form a picture pretty quickly. And I was just talking earlier this morning with the president of COPA, and they figure that about their members appear to have an accident rate that's about 50% lower than non-members. So I think there's a lot of benefit for any aircraft owner to belong to the aircraft type club for that particular type of aircraft. So yeah, that's where I heard about it first.
Sure. Yeah. Owners clubs are always just an unbelievable wealth of information for whatever that specific type is. Now, the first thing before we get started here, I want to kind of mention on record is that I do, of course, consider it a treat anytime I get to fly a Cirrus. I mean, even an older one. And I love that because an older one, quote unquote, is still an aircraft built in the 2000s. But before we get into these accidents.
Well, hang on. Let me stop you right there. So what about it do you like? Why is it a treat?
Oh, okay. Well, first off, the modernness of it, the design, the simplicity. When you get in a Cirrus, they're so easy to start, to operate. And I love, actually, probably my favorite feature of a Cirrus is the ergonomics of when you sit in that seat, the way the panel is laid out in front of you, where all of the knobs and switches are, they just fall perfectly to hand. And so as you're taxiing and flying, everything is exactly where you want it to be. And I'm really big on ergonomics and interfacing with the machine. And I think Cirrus really they nailed it. I don't think you could do any better.
Oh, you can do better. That would be in the Cirrus Vision Jet. And I'm very serious. You will be absolutely blown away when you sit inside of that. It feels like you're sitting more like in a luxury car. You've got open space on the side panels. You've got kind of curved lines that integrate the different portions of the panel together. Whatever you liked in the 22, you are going to love in the SF-50 jet.
I can only imagine. I peeked my head in once at an air show, and it was amazing that the guy wasn't there to let us actually sit in it, but everything looked just so modern, so minimalist. I think Apple would be proud.
Oh, indeed.
So when we fly an aircraft like a Cirrus, would you say that the simplicity of operation, the fact that actually a question from one of my really good friends of the show here named Ted, he was interested in this too. Is there any psychology you'd say involved in just the fact that since a Cirrus is such a high performance aircraft, it's so simple to operate in normal conditions, is there any psychology between or behind having things like that simplicity, a ballistic recovery chute and things like that, lulling people into maybe exceeding their abilities?
So I think the first thing is that having some simplicity and having some additional safety systems definitely reduces the workload for the pilot, and that allows a pilot to focus on other things that might be more important than trying to keep the wings level. They can be thinking about weather and diversions and fuel and all those kinds of things. And yes, I think it is possible to get lulled into a little bit of complacency, and I think that would be true for any type of car or plane that's got advanced features.
Sure. Okay. And, Cirrus is unfortunately, and I really do mean that unfortunately, because again, I do love flying them myself, kind of got a little bit of a stigma attached to them, kind of like the Bonanza used to have. Do you think that that's deserved?
It perhaps was deserved in the initial couple of years. I don't think it's fair today. If you take a look at the safety record, I think that when the aircraft first came out, the fatal accident rate was somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 fatal accidents per 100,000 hours. It's now down right around 1 or slightly below 1 fatal accident per 100,000 hours. And it matches up pretty well with the single-engine GA fatal accident rate. So I would say for many years now, probably, I would say at least 5-6 years, our numbers have been, at times better than the overall GA numbers, or, really right on top of them. So no, I think people are looking back at the early days. And by the way, I should mention that for any new aircraft type, when a new type is brought out, there's always a higher accident rate in the early years, and then it comes down over time. So Cirrus is no different than any other aircraft in that regard.
Very understandable. All right, so let's start getting into our first accident case study here. And this is why you and I are both excited to get together and have this talk. And this one is kind of an interesting one. And as I listened to it watched the video from AOPA after that tweet that you sent out, the thing that just kept coming back to me was the way that the pilot and ATC interaction happened. And that for me is something that it's very near and dear to me. And as somebody who does both of these things, that I understand the interaction in a way that probably not that many people do. But as I was watching it, I just started cringing not because of any specific thing, but because of so many things that kept happening in the interaction here. So what I want to do is play the audio from this for all the listeners to hear, and then you and I are going to start talking after that about your take on the crash, and we'll kind of hit some of the key points of what happened. Does that sound good?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think there's a lot of people can learn from this, regardless of what kind of aircraft they fly.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is none of this is specific to a Cirrus. It could be any high performance aircraft or even low performance aircraft. Okay, here we go.
Cirrus 52 Golf Tower.
425 Golf.
Yeah, I got traffic behind you. Just go around and fly runway heading now. Maintain VFR. I'm going to put you back in a downwind for runway 35. The winds are 09 or 0 at 13, gust 18. Can you accept runway 35?
We'll do go around and line up for runway 35, downwind.
52 Golf. Fly runway heading for runway 4 for right now.
We'll fly runway heading for 452 Golf.
That was 235, runway 4, clear to land number 1.
Clear to land number 1, Cirrus 235, runway 4.
For 52 Golf, when able, go ahead and make a right downwind now for runway 35, and then we'll just go ahead and keep that right turn, runway 35, clear to land. 737 on 5 mile final to runway 4, and you're going to be in front of him.
425 Golf, turning around for runway 35.
Okay, 52 Golf, yeah, let's just enter the right downwind for runway 35.
Right downwind 35, 425 Golf.
52 Golf, I'll call your right base now.
Cirrus 52 Golf, 737, that's your 2 o'clock and 3 miles at 900 feet inbound for runway 4, advise that traffic in sight.
I have traffic in sight, 425 Golf.
52 Golf, make a right base behind that traffic, runway 35, clear to land. You're going to be following them. They're going to be landing crossing runway prior to your arrival.
We'll make a right base following them, 425 Golf for 35.
Alpha 3564, Cirrus traffic ahead and to your right, has you inside. It's going to make a right base behind you, landing crossing runway behind you.
Alpha 3564.
Cirrus 52 Golf, make a turn left heading 30 degrees.
Left heading 30 degrees, 425 Golf.
For 52 Golf, did you want to follow the 737 to runway 4?
Yes, that would be great, 425 Golf.
For 52 Golf, roger. Follow the 737 and to runway 4, clear to land.
So am I turning a right base now, 425 Golf?
For 52 Golf, roger. Just maneuver back for the straight in. I don't know which way you're going now, so just turn back around to runway 35.
Turning to 35, I'm so sorry for the confusion, 425 Golf.
That's okay, we'll get it.
Tower King is 350 Golf Alpha, visual runway 4, parking at Cockpit, Eastern Road.
350 Golf Alpha, Tower, roger, continue. Okay, yeah, that's fine, 52 Golf. Just make it, so you're in a right turn, keep it tight. I need you to make it tight.
Keeping turn tight, 425 Golf.
0 Golf Alpha, traffic alert, heading to your right in 1 mile, 900 feet.
0 Golf Alpha, looking.
For 52 Golf, I need you to, okay, there you go, straight into runway 35, clear to land.
Straight into 35, clear to land, and I don't believe I'm lined up for that, 425 Golf.
Okay, 52 Golf, roger, turn to the right and climb maintain 1,600, right turn.
1,600, right turn, 425 Golf.
52 Golf, yes ma'am, heading about 040.
040, 425 Golf.
Okay, 52 Golf, let's do this. Can you do a right turn back to join the straight into 35? Could you do it like that?
Yes, right turn back to 35, 425 Golf.
For 52 Golf, okay, so you're just going to make a right turn all the way around to runway 35, and now you're clear to land.
35, clear to land, 425 Golf.
Thank you. Clear to land, number 2, the airport. Traffic's to Cirrus, rolling on about a mile final, runway 35.
All right, we'll slow it down.
Okay, great. Here's 52 Golf. Okay, you're looking good. Just continue a right turn for runway 35. Do you see runway 35 still?
Yes, 35, 425 Golf. Have it in sight. Continuing my roll around.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you're good. So you can start your descent to runway 35 there and clear to land on 35.
Clear to land 35, 425 Golf. Thank you very much.
No problems. Winds are 100 at 10. I'm sorry, winds are 100 at 15, gust to 20. For 5-2 Golf, if you don't want to land, that's too high, we can put you back around the downwind. Don't force it if you can't.
Okay, we'll see. Thank you. 425 Golf.
3194, contact Hobie Tower on 118.7. You have a nice day.
Lewis to the tower, Southwest 3194.
I think you're too high, Cirrus. 5-2 Golf, you might be too high.
Okay, we'll go around then. 425 Golf.
Cirrus 5-2 Golf, Roger. You're just going to make a right traffic now for runway 35. We'll come back around and we got it this time.
Down. Traffic to 3.
For 5-2 Golf, make right downwind to runway 35, and you are clear to land. There'll be no other traffic for runway 4, so this one will be easy. 5-2 Golf, affirmative, and clear to land on runway 35 via the right downwind, right base. 5-2 Golf, and there's a 737 on short final runway 4, touching down right in front of you, so just caution wave turbulence right there at that intersection.
Okay, I got that in sight. Thank you. 425 Golf. Runway 35 in sight. 425 Golf.
5-2 Golf, winds 090 at 13, gust 18, runway 35, again clear to land.
35 clear to land, trying to get down again. 425 Golf.
No problem.
Okay, Cirrus 5-2 Golf, just go ahead and make the left turn now to enter the downwind, midfield downwind for runway 4. If you can, just keep me a nice, low, tight pattern. I'm going to have traffic 4 miles behind you, so I need you to just kind of keep it in tight if you could. And actually, I might end up sequencing you behind that traffic. It's on 4 miles a minute. It is going to be a little bit tight with the one behind it. So when you get on that downwind, stay on the downwind. Advise me when you have that 737 in sight. We'll either do 4, or we might swing you around to 3-5. Ma'am, straighten up.
All right, man, those recordings are always difficult to listen to. And for those of you that are having maybe that was a long recording and trying to put this together in your head, what happened there were multiple runway changes, and there were in fact 3 go-arounds. You didn't mishear that. There were 3 go-arounds, and she actually ended up talking with 2 different controllers. They switched out at one point in the middle of this. So the pilot herself, she was relatively low time, but not totally inexperienced either, and not a career track pilot type. And these individuals, it was a pilot and 2 passengers. They were actually traveling from Oklahoma down to Texas to visit a friend who was receiving cancer treatment at a local hospital. So I think it might be fair to say, too, that there was a little bit of, they weren't in their normal frame of mind. And air traffic was having difficulty fitting that Cirrus into the airliner arrival sequence. Now, we know that airport is very busy with jet traffic, particularly 737s. That's a big Southwest hub. And I noticed that air traffic was definitely trying to do their best to get her on the ground too. And so they kind of, I believe truly that the controllers were trying to help. They were trying to help her get to a runway as quickly as possible. And I mean, this has happened to me too. You know, maybe when you get a little flustered, things aren't going right, something kind of slips out, like a not quite standard phraseology sentence that you wish you hadn't said. And I think it's pretty clear that air traffic kind of wanted her on the ground. They could tell that she was getting a little flustered too. And that changes your attitude sometimes when you're working an airplane like this. But obviously there are a couple of different things that could have been done, and maybe a little patience would have helped. But we could tell that the pilot was getting flustered. It was a medium length flight, medium to long. And with all those runway changes and go-arounds, I think it was just difficult to keep up. And then eventually, unfortunately, when the control was saying, "Straighten up, ma'am, straighten up," that was the entrance into a stall spin. And after that 3rd go-around, I think just when you're fatigued and you just want to get those flaps up, go around and try to get this thing on the ground. Fast hands brought the flaps up a little too soon during a loaded turn. And unfortunately, in most high-performance aircrafts, when you have a loaded up wing and a low airspeed and you pull up the flaps, that's kind of the recipe for a spin. And of course, we can talk about the interactions of her with air traffic and how a little bit more assertiveness or a little less assertiveness on one side or the other might have helped. So, Max, what were you thinking when you watched this video and heard this audio the first time?
Well, it was probably the perfect storm in some different ways. I think that everybody was trying to do the right thing, both the pilot and both the controller. I would say that the pilot was probably a little tired to begin with. It was a 3-hour flight coming down from Norman, Oklahoma. She was on that frequency with the Houston controller for almost 15 minutes. Part of that was before she arrived at the pattern, but it was a full 10 minutes once she was in the pattern. And you got to figure that was a pretty high workload. Not only were they given 3 different passes at the runway, but it wasn't just 3 runways. They kept changing, and sometimes on the same go around. It's like, oh, I'm going to do 3-5, but would you prefer 4? And just so many just changes going on. I think that it was probably also confusing to the pilot to kind of identify, all right, now which one is runway 4? All right, okay, which one is runway 35? Where am I relative to those 2 runways? Which way do I turn, and so on? And certainly at least one point, the pilot was a little bit out of position, I think because of an ambiguous heading that, or turn that the controller gave at that particular point. But I also think on the controller side, maybe the controllers were either being a little too optimistic or trying to be a little too helpful. When I say optimistic, I think that they were really trying to squeeze her in. They knew they had a lot of arrivals, and they were just kind of thinking, yeah, I think I could make this work out. And yet they weren't able to make it work out in 3 different passes. So that tells me they were trying a little bit too hard to make it work when it just wasn't going to work. Now, I know you can't tell that every time. It's a little bit of a guesswork as to way it's, whether it's going to work or not. But geez, 3 different times not being able to figure out that there wasn't enough space between the aircraft to get her in. And so I think between the high workload as well as just the over helpfulness in the last case, I mean, I think that the last instruction from the controller, I mean, doesn't that have to go down as a record in terms of kind of a long, slightly confusing transmission?
Yeah, it sure does. I think in the NTSB report, it actually mentions here it was I think that one single transmission was 15 or 16 seconds long. Which is which may be some sort of record. I'm not sure, but yeah, we can tell it on both sides. I agree with you definitely. And again, we're talking about this as a case study. We're not armchair quarterbacking. And to my fellow controller who is working this, I do deeply believe that everybody at that tower was trying to do the right thing. And a point that I kind of liked was that I think it was the second controller noticed that she was too high. I think that was the runway 35 approach. And he said, it's okay. It's okay to go around. Don't force it. And like you said, it was perhaps a little too much optimism, and they were really trying to make it work, to get her on the ground. I think everybody was getting a little stressed, and so a little too much of a good thing kind of ended up spoiling the broth. And unfortunately, it ended in disaster after that. But it's often difficult to tell, well, which is better or worse for a certain pilot. Is it let's try it again, or is it, hey, why don't you just circle just west of the airport there? And it might be 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, but we'll find you a nice big arrival gap, and then we'll get you in no problem. So sometimes it's hard to see that. And I noticed that in your I think it was in your tweet or something you wrote up about it, you had another option, which may have been to go back to approach. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. I think that came out in the NTSB report. They said that they thought that the pilot could have perhaps been more assertive by not just following the instructions from the local controller, but either asking to go back to approach. Now I was kind of surprised by that one. I don't think that would have been in my mind at all. I think once a pilot is with a local controller, they try and follow every instruction. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of like my cat following the laser pointer. That cat's going to do whatever it can to follow that laser pointer. He's not going to think about breaking it off and doing something different. And I think the same thing would be true for most pilots. I don't think most of them would think, this is just getting a little too much. I think I'll ask to get out of here and go back to approach and have them resequence me. I think that's more likely to be something that a controller would suggest because they have the big picture and they would know whether or not there's room to get me sequenced in there. I think pilots just continue to follow instructions and not really necessarily think about, hey, there's an option. I can end this game for now, take a timeout, and come back later.
Absolutely. And I just found the phraseology here in the NTSB report that you're referring to. And it says here, the pilot was attempting to comply with ATC instructions throughout the flight, and the pilot's actions are understandable as the instructions were largely consistent with the pilot's goal of landing at the busy airport. However, compliance with ATC instructions greatly increased the pilot's workload as it led to an extended period of close-in maneuvering at a Class B airport due to the larger and faster airplanes converging on the airport. And during this extended period of maneuvering, the pilot did not assert the responsibilities that accompany being pilot in command and did not offload the workload by either requesting to be resequenced, telling the controller to stand by, or simply stating unable. And this allowed for an increased likelihood of operational distractions associated with ATC communications and affected the pilot's ability to focus on aircraft control. End quote. So yeah, it's kind of interesting because, air traffic's job is to move airplanes and to get everybody on the ground. And there's obviously a big motivation to do that. And having a Cirrus just circling around your airport while you're trying to land 737s is probably not something that a controller is trying to have happen. However, given a little more time, given the fact that the situation was getting a little bit stressful, a little flustered, sometimes that's the perfect time to just take a little time out, go circle to the west of the airport, or find a time where you can fit nicely into the approach mix without it having to be forced anymore. And I think that's what this was going to, is at that point, it would be the pilot's time to speak up and say, hey, you know what? Why don't I just circle somewhere where there isn't anyone? Or why don't we just do this? Or can you stand by and let me figure this out? And then the controller, at least every controller I know, would of course be willing to work with that.
Sure. And I think for most pilots, that would not be something they would necessarily think of. But hopefully, after we've talked about this and some people hear the show, maybe they will now think about that, in the future. This pilot had been licensed for just 2 years, and I just think that, the pilot probably was just going to continue to follow every instruction the controller gave without, calling for a timeout. Now, you raised a really good point, which was on the second approach and possibly the third approach as well. The pilot was too high to land. And so I think that's a common issue, especially with low-time pilots. They will fly a traffic pattern, and they will basically wait till they're on final to figure out, am I too high or am I too low? And yet I think it's fairly easy if you start thinking about it and working on it and practicing it to determine, even when you're on downwind or you're on base, do you think you're somewhat high or somewhat low? For a standard traffic pattern of 1,000 feet, I tell folks that they probably want to lose about 200 feet before they turn base. Otherwise, they're going to end up turning high. At my local airport here, we have an 800-foot traffic pattern, so I suggest people lose about 100 feet on downwind, lose a couple hundred feet on base, and show up on final right around 500 feet above the ground. If she had been able to keep track of her position and distance from the airport and kind of be stepping her way down in a methodical way, she might not have had to do one or more of these go-arounds. So I think that's an important skill that's probably not taught real well to pilots during the training period to get their private license. But it just really becomes helpful if you can figure out how to avoid go-arounds simply because you're keeping track of your height above the ground as you work the pattern.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And this is probably a good time for me to, I hate to stand on a soapbox and keep saying this, but air traffic control is in fact a two-way street. It doesn't mean that, it seems as if in this case, she was trying so hard to comply with what the controller was telling her that she kind of let that be the controlling factor. And yes, of course, you need to comply with ATC instructions. It says that right there in the books. But at the same time, there does come a time where you are the pilot in command and you have the authority as to the operation of that aircraft. You're the final word, and that's the end of it. So if you get yourself in a point where you can't comply with an ATC instruction, it's definitely the pilot's obligation to state something and perhaps provide an alternative. So instead of just saying, no, I'm not going to do it, maybe for a second, but perhaps provide an alternative to what else you can do. Because again, different aircraft types are operated differently. And even when I'm sitting there on the hot seat, plugged in and working live air traffic, sure, I've flown a lot of airplanes, but I don't know what your particular mission is that day. I don't know if that aircraft has a limitation on it that I don't want to tell you to exceed and so on. So if I do, then I would expect for you to come back and say, you know what, I can't comply with that, but here's what I can do. And I think in this situation, that would have made all the difference.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that pilots should always consider as an option. I think part of the problem was that most pilots, I think, are very goal-oriented. The goal for today is to land at with a destination. I tell pilots the goal should be to land safely somewhere, not necessarily at the destination. But I think pilots also get target fixation or tunnel vision. Once they're kind of locked onto a goal, it's kind of like a pit bull, locked onto a prey. It's like, up, shake it, and, won't let go of it. So I think this pilot was just doing everything possible. I'm going to land here today, and we're going to make this work. And so I think that sometimes can, get people in trouble as well. I mean, there was one other factor we haven't really talked about, and this one I wasn't fully aware of until I saw the video. On each of the go-arounds, she was raising flaps at progressively slower and slower and slower airspeeds, and ultimately, that's actually what caused this particular accident. So I do a lot of teaching in SR-20s. On a go-around, you're not to raise flaps from 50% to zero until you are somewhere between 81 and 83 knots. On her first go-around, she raised them at 76. The next one, she raised them at 69. And the last one, she raised them at 62. Now, unfortunately, with flaps up, the stall speed is going to be higher than 62 knots. And so the moment she started to retract that, she was guaranteed to stall. And she was also in a turn at that point, I think at least a 15-degree bank. And so that translated instantly into a spin.
Yeah, it sure did. Now, maybe not this particular aircraft. Obviously, we can't speak to that one. But one thing that I do like in new glass panel aircraft is when they put the flap speeds actually on the airspeed tape as a reference. Is that something that Cirrus does?
Yes, so there was going to be a white indication on the tape for the airspeed, which is going to be the flap operating range. It's also printed right on the flap switch, so it's pretty easy to take a look at the flap switch and see what the maximum speed for the flaps would be. Minimum speed is just going to show up where the red portion is on the airspeed indicator, which of course would be the stall range. I would imagine she was so overloaded at this point that she wasn't watching her airspeed, because frankly, I would never allow anybody to climb out at 62 knots on a go-around. When I start to see anything that gets in the low 70s on a climb out, well, frankly, anything below 75. 75 is the speed that you would be at if you did a short field takeoff in SR-20, and that's your over the 50-foot obstacle speed. Anything less than 75, people start hearing from me. So, at 62, I would have been beside myself. I would have already been pushing forward on the stick to get additional speed.
Yeah, that's pucker factor minus 10, right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, well, what a terrible tragedy. It's really unfortunate that all happened.
It was, but I'm hoping that people who are listening to today will be able to take away something from it and prevent another tragedy.
All right, well, maybe this is the perfect time to move on to another one. What do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay, so our next one here on the docket is the occurrence in Melbourne, Florida. Now, this accident occurred on February 29th of 2012, so a few years back now. But again, it was a Cirrus. It was an SR-22. Melbourne, Florida, 3 fatal, pilot plus 2 passengers, much like the last one. And let's go ahead and listen to the audio on this.
Power Tower, Cirrus 540 Romeo, over radiation inbound for full stop. 40 Romeo, Melbourne. You're over radiation? Just past radiation, westbound 1,000 feet. 40 Romeo, speak to and report right mid full downwind for only 9 and right. Right mid still downwind for 9 right, 40 Romeo. I'll get you 9 left if I can. I'm a little busy right now. Right, fine, 40 Romeo. 3 Charlie, can you make 40 Romeo? I'm just going to have to land you on 9 right there with a taxi back to the ramp, or else I'm going to have to extend it for about 6 miles to follow a Cessna. 9 right's fine, and if I can get a long landing, I'm going to Barra. That'd be great, 40 Romeo. Oh, Barra, that's better. Okay, then 40 Alpha, 40 Romeo. The long landing is full with runway 9 right. And third land. Clear to land on 9 right, 40 Romeo. 40 Romeo, do you have the Cirrus there? He's about a mile final for 9 right. I'm on a real short base for 9 right to land now, 40 Romeo. 40 Romeo, no, so I needed you to extend the follow the Cirrus out there, mile final. Cut it in tight now, cut it in tight to 9 right. That's the center 5 Hendrick, Melbourne. Melbourne, Delta 21 ahead. Alright, 1 Delta Alpha, go around straight ahead. Going around 1 Delta Alpha. Tower, did you see that? I did. I saw that too. Do the thing up. 7 Echo Romeo, you want the full stop or go around? 7 Echo Romeo, you make the full stop, 9. Okay. Thank you, 7 Echo Romeo. Just make the full stop for 9 left. We'll do. 9 left, full stop, clear to land, 7 Echo Romeo. No one, 310 Charlie, standby on ILS 9, right? Okay, 0 Charlie, standby.
So to recap what happened here, the Cirrus was inbound And there was some confusion over which runway. They have a set of parallel runways east-west, and there are several FBOs kind of scattered all over the airport. And the controller, I think for whatever reason, was assuming that the Cirrus was inbound to the one that's on the north side of the airport. So he kept trying to say, well, I'll get you the other runway if I can. And then the guy was like, no, the right's fine and they eventually finally said, we're going to this other FBO. So, that's actually better. But the confusion was over whether or not the pilot was going to make a short approach. And air traffic didn't really sequence him because he was, in fact, in the controller's mind, number 2 for that runway. But in the Cirrus's mind, he didn't know that he was number 2. And why he made the short approach, though, the controller later stated that was not something he expected, and rightfully so. So 2 sort of things happened right there. There was no sequence, and then the Cirrus made an unexpected maneuver. So what happened is the controller then got a little flustered, noticed what was happening, and when he came back on the radio, he definitely, you could tell in his voice, he wasn't too happy about what was going on. But then unfortunately, the Cirrus pilot, and this is really the catch, made a very, very, very abrupt maneuver, which resulted in a stall spin accident almost instantaneously. Witnesses say that he did deploy the parachute, but of course at that low of an altitude, there was no way it was going to be able to slow the descent. And that was pretty much it.
So I've got a question for you as an air traffic controller. Are you required to give a sequence? Are you required to tell, in this case, the accident aircraft, you're number 2 clear to land, as opposed to just saying clear to land if there's somebody in front of him?
Yes. As my understanding, Melbourne's a Class Delta airport, and your job in a Delta airspace between 2 VFR aircraft, there is actually not a specific amount of distance that 2 just straight VFR airplanes would have to be from each other, because the idea is, I can see both of you, or you can see each other, or so forth. However, you do have to provide a sequence to the landing runway.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well, too. It took me a long time after I became a pilot to realize that, yes, indeed, the tower is responsible for the sequence. I know that, and it's clear that he did not give the sequence here. So it looks like, the controller was, partially responsible right there. It was not clear to me for many years that the pilot is responsible for the separation. And I think there were times probably when I crept up on the airplane in front of me and had to go around, and I was thinking, that darn airplane in front of me, it's his fault. And of course, I only kind of figured out years later, wait a minute, I'm responsible for the separation. If I had to go around because I got too close to that airplane, in the main, that's going to be on me. Yes, I may have been in a situation that I just couldn't fix. I might have had a skycatcher landing at 50 knots in front of me, and I'm flying, a turboprop or something like that. Sure, those things kind of happen. But yeah, I think a lot of pilots don't realize, and I could kind of hear the tone of their voice when they go around. They take umbrage. It's like, I had to go around because that darn airplane in front of me. It's like, well, no, sir, you actually had a role in this.
Exactly. I had a pilot at my airport actually walk up to me kind of upset one day. You see a guy out on the ramp and you're like, oh, great, here we go. And he, of course, proceeded to recount an incident where he was following a Cessna. And I happen to know that this guy, he actually does fly a Cirrus, and he likes to fly it fast. And I'm okay with that. I like to fly Cirruses fast too. That's one of their best features. But unfortunately, at some point, you do have to slow down. And when you're entering a traffic pattern, that might be an appropriate time to do it. But the way he said it is, he said, so I was following the Cessna, and I caught up so close that I had to go around. What kind of separation were you providing me? And I said, sir, what kind of separation were you providing me? And he kind of seemed surprised. And that it illustrates your point perfectly, is that he didn't understand that either, that once you've been sequenced and you have your traffic in sight, it's then on you to kind of space it appropriately. Now, sure, I'll do my best to tell you how fast he's going. Like, for instance, if you're following a Piper Cub, I would make it very clear that you're following a Piper Cub that's going 40 knots. But in the case of, 2 relatively medium to high performance singles, it's kind of on the pilot. And as I read this particular accident report, and then they were talking about how the controller felt that I guess he didn't need to, it happened so short or so close to the runway that I'm guessing it's actually within half a mile of each other, both for 9 right and only about 300 feet up. So at this point, I'm guessing the controller, and I don't know this, but I'm guessing, thought that first airplane for the runway was already so close that by the time the pilot saw him, he would already be over the threshold, and the accident aircraft would have, in fact, at that point been the number 1 aircraft for the runway. So only as a controller can I see how I think that actually would make sense to him. But then unfortunately, by approving that long landing, I think the pilot took that to mean, well, if I'm going to land long, I'm going to turn base at a time that's appropriate for a long landing. And then that was really what kind of set this whole thing in motion.
Exactly. I would agree. So just for clarification, you're saying if the preceding aircraft were over the numbers and were just about to touch down, then it would have been fine to say clear to land without a sequence. But given that plane was still on a mile final, as far as you know, that's a violation of the controller workbook rules.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's correct. If the aircraft has crossed the threshold, then you're now number one for the runway at that point. Yeah.
Okay. There was another point. So yes, I agree. The pilot probably thought, oh, hey, I'm number one. I'm going to land long. This is a really long runway. Might as well turn base right at the threshold. That way I'll be landing, halfway down and roll out at the end. And for sure that would be a short approach, and, pilots should request that. Now, I thought that the part of the language the controller used at the very end, besides being very urgent, was also very confusing. I mean, here's an instruction I don't think we can find in the controller handbook. Cut it in tight now, cut it in tight for 9 Romeo. I don't even know what that means as a pilot, and I've been flying for 40 years.
Yeah, that I'm going to tiptoe lightly here, but absolutely. And, one of the things you learn very early when you become a controller is you don't ever want to be the person that told somebody to do the thing that caused a crash. I mean, that's just one of those things. That's, of course, not written in the book, and you feel it goes without saying. But a lot of times, air traffic and the experience of a controller is based on what they observe from their perspective. So what I think the controller meant at that point was you've got a Cirrus on close-in base, probably already inside of, let's say, the runway threshold, and then another aircraft on final to that same runway. So I think what the controller probably meant was tighten up the turn because you're about to get T-boned by the guy on final. And so by that, I think he meant, tighten it up or cut it in tight, which means tighten up the turn, and then you'll be going the same direction and the guy won't catch you anymore. But of course, in the heat of the moment, when something like that happens, as I said before, sometimes something slips out that you probably wish you hadn't said.
I agree that that's one possible interpretation, which would then make that aircraft, the accident aircraft, number one instead of number two. And there was, no suggestion here that there was change in sequence. But immediately before that, he said, "No, sir, I need you to extend to follow." And he means the airplane. He didn't say that. "I need to extend you to follow out there on a mile final," which would mean, extend your downwind, follow that person on a mile final. Cut it in tight now, cut it in tight for 9 right. To me, the two are contradictory. The first part of the instruction is, you've got to extend your downwind to follow. The second one, as best I can interpret, is, make a tight right turn to precede that aircraft. And I can understand the Cirrus accident pilot's confusion turning left. I would say it's kind of a 50-50 as to what did that mean? Do I turn left or should I turn right? Yeah,
and as I read this report here, and I can actually read it in black and white from somebody who probably listened to this more times than I could ever stand, the little nuance between I need and I needed you to do this, I think was really the big thing. The controller was saying, I needed you to do that, and then implying, but now cut it in tight because you're about to get hit off the left. But then, of course, in the heat of the moment, that is probably not what was heard. And so the pilot's sitting here thinking, perhaps, okay, I'll go back to the left. And that's just, something that a nuance that small, I don't think anybody would be able to catch.
I'm sitting here reading the accident report, and I didn't catch it as I was reading it to you just now. So yes, it does say, I needed you to extend to follow. But still, I think that leaves some doubt. Okay, I needed you to do this before. It kind of implies, and I still need you to continue doing that. It wasn't real clear to me that, okay, this is now a changing game plan. I need you to turn right quickly. Anyway, I think we both agree this was incredibly confusing language that was used.
Absolutely. And that's, unfortunately, as a Class Delta tower controller myself, I'll reveal a little something here that I feel, but the book is written in a certain way, and there's phraseology that's prescribed for us that's to be used in a certain way. And of course, without sounding too dad lecture-y here, the reason for that is so that there is very little to no room for confusion, and that the phraseology that's used both satisfies a legal requirement, and then it also satisfies a communication requirement, and both things have to be there. And that's why some of the language that we use can sound so foreign, because it's mostly written by the legal department. So unfortunately, at a place that's working a lot of VFR aircraft, the book does not always provide very clear-cut, solid phraseology for what you would do in a weird situation like that. When you have a Cirrus cutting in front of somebody on a short approach to a long landing, I can assure you that's not covered in the 7110.65. So one of the first paragraphs, though, does say that when something that's not covered by the book occurs, that you are to exercise your best judgment to meet the requirements of that. So in the heat of the moment for this kind of stuff, and this is, of course, what you train for, is when something surprises you, how are you going to stay calm, cool, collected, and then say just the right thing, no more, no less? And it's very, very difficult to do that. Much easier said than done. So I'm thinking in here, the guy was, sometimes you press that microphone button and you're still thinking about what you're going to say while you start talking. And he went very quickly from what I wish you had done to what you need to do now. And unfortunately, the what I wish you had done is already in the past. And I think that what I need you to do now is kind of the part, and maybe the only part, that needs to come out.
Yeah, I think in this particular case, it would have been easy for the pilot to, as the first half of that sentence came out, start the turn left because, hey, I needed you to do this. And then as he's already in the turn to the left, it's cut it in tight, to 9 right. So yeah, I think it was incredibly confusing. But what the pilot, unfortunately, I think reacted way too quickly. I mean, we can agree that the instructions were confusing, but the pilot's reaction, I think, was inappropriate. I think in a situation like this, my first reaction would have been to, add full power, start to pitch up, and then worry about which way I was going to be turning. And my inclination, it's 50-50. Continue on downwind probably would be safer, so I would probably be inclined to turn the same direction that he did. The problem is, I think he pitched up too high. So pilots need to understand how much pitch is appropriate when you are trying to climb. And I know in this particular airplane, if you set the attitude indicator for 10 degrees and you've got full power and you have sufficient speed as you initiated that, that's going to give you pretty close to VY, best rate of climb. There have been a couple accidents where Cirrus aircraft on base have been pitched too high. They've been pitched up, about 5 degrees, and it's easy to get slow and stall at that point and potentially spin in. In this particular case, I think the abruptness and the pitch is what contributed to this. So even in spite of the confusing instructions, I think this pilot could have been a little bit more deliberate and not really been coiled up like a spring and made this instantaneous large change in the flight path.
Yeah, and one of the witnesses of the accident was an airline pilot getting ready to depart. And what he stated was that he had never seen such abrupt maneuvering outside of an air show. And that was his quote that he said about the maneuver that the guy pulled. So we can, I think, probably deduce that the Cirrus pilot was very, very much flustered by the way that the instruction was given. And one of the other things that this pilot stated was, the witness pilot that is, stated was that the controller was yelling at him at the time. And I'm not sure if I'd go so far as to say that, because I've listened to this plenty of times and we all just heard it ourselves. Now, he definitely sounded flustered. I'll agree with that. But was he yelling at him? I'm not quite so sure. But I think, to a pilot that's just been startled, the reaction, it really came out. And it's unfortunate because you're exactly right. It was a very, very, very abrupt overreaction to what would have been required. But what do you think of this? Even though the controller was telling him to do something, and I would never advocate that you just go straight against what ATC says. However, back to the PIC authority thing, what do you think about if the guy had just said, hey, I don't even know what cut it in tight means. I'm going to not stall my aircraft in a loaded turn right now, and I'm just going to initiate a go around and more or less fly the runway heading. Do you think that would have been good use of PIC authority?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that would be equally as good an option as turning back to the downwind. I don't know how far he was in the turn to base, but assuming that he had already turned base, then it was the same distance in either direction, and it would have, wouldn't have been clear as to which would be the safer way to go unless he could see the other aircraft. Now, I was thinking about the traffic systems which are available in virtually every Cirrus aircraft. When I fly into my home airport, I'm always looking at the traffic, and I got to tell you, 9 times out of 10, I already know what my sequence is because I've identified all the airplanes that are out there ahead of me. And I'll tell the pilot, it looks like we're going to be number 4. And sure enough, 9 times out of 10, hey, you're number 4. So this can really be determined pretty clearly. Now, The difference here at Melbourne is you've got parallel runways. Now, depending upon the traffic system in this aircraft, you might not be able to tell the difference when you look at the traffic system between an aircraft that was lined up for 9 left versus 9 right, particularly the TAS systems, the traffic awareness systems. Those identify the distance just by the signal strength of the transponder coming back. And so the position accuracy is much poorer on that system than, say, on the TIS system, where radar determines the position of the aircraft, or even ADSB, where GPS determines the position of the other aircraft. So I would say the pilot probably hadn't been really fully listening to everything that was going on in the pattern, hadn't really built a mental map in his mind as to where all the other aircraft were. And I'm betting he's got 2 of his employees in the airplane. Good chance he was distracted. I think they were, probably having a good time. They might have been talking, and it would be really easy for him to not have realized, I did hear 90 seconds ago someone cleared for the right. I had to figure out, am I inside or outside of that person?
Yeah. And what you said, I really appreciate that you do that. And again, back to the point of the mark of a professional pilot is somebody who really truly understands the breadth and depth of that PIC authority. And I like what you said about you already know your sequence, because, okay, we don't always have an active traffic system. I'll give you that. But for people who do, that have TCAS or TAS or TIS or whatever they have, you have this level of awareness where you can kind of get a visual picture of what's going on. And then a truly experienced professional pilot is going to try to see into that, maybe not so far that they've already got something committed in their mind that may or may not occur, but to the point where they're very, very aware, situationally aware, as CFI might tell you, of everything that's going on around them, to the point where they're already planning everything based on what they think the controller is going to do. Because I can 100% guarantee you that that's what the controller is doing on his side, is trying to see what each pilot is going to do. That we observe how aircraft tend to slow down towards a ref speed, and the difference between piston aircraft performance versus jet performance. Jets don't slow down and go down at the same time, things like that. So for a pilot to be looking at what ATC is doing and then having ATC be looking at what a pilot's doing, that's that two-way street that I'm talking about. And it's just so important that people understand that. And the best levels of safety and actually performance and getting what you want to out of the system, that's really only going to occur when it is that two-way street like that. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
And I was just thinking we could take it one step further. When I'm landing at airports with parallel runways, there will be times when the controller tells me, and that other aircraft out there is set up for the left runway if I'm set up for the right. And there are just as many times where I'll ask that question myself. I'll say, hey, is that inbound aircraft for the left? And they go, Roger, it's for the left. Now I can relax. I don't have to worry as much that somehow there's been some confusion and we're both headed for the same runway. And again, even if he had a traffic system and there was some ambiguity as the position of the targets, probably would have allowed him to just kind of say, hey, I see some traffic here. Is that traffic for the left or the right? Well, they would have found out at that point, guess what? That traffic is for the same runway he was going to. So there was a missed opportunity there.
Yeah, agreed.
Now, I've got one question here for you about both of these accidents.
Sure.
Do you think that the fact that it was a Cirrus had anything to do with either one of these?
No, I don't. That's my big, point that I want to make in this episode that we're talking about is it is not the object's fault. That could happen to any aircraft. It really doesn't matter. It could happen to the Cub. It could happen to, we've seen something like that happen. Actually, a stall loss of control with a Learjet, actually at Teterboro just this last year. So no, I don't believe that it's the Cirrus's fault at all.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes, by the way, Cirruses actually fly at least twice as many hours per year as the average aircraft. I think on average, the fleet flies about 200 hours per year. So the owners who use these aircraft use them a lot. And I think the typical aircraft flies maybe 100 hours a year, except for airliners, of course. And so these airplanes are overrepresented simply because they're out there flying much more often, which is why we hear about these things more often.
Sure. Yeah. Statistically speaking, if something is more utilized, it's going to be subject to more risk, I suppose.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I tell you what, I'm not sure if this is a funny one or not. I always like to, have a positive, fun note at the end, but I want to talk about that video that we've all seen now about the guy hand propping the Cirrus. What was going on with that?
Well, let me ask you, how much time do you spend hand propping aircraft?
0. None time.
You have exactly the same amount of hand propping experience as I have. Does that mean maybe, we're missing out on something and we ought to run out there and acquire that skill?
I would say no.
Yeah, I agree. I have no desire to learn how to hand prop. I've heard of too many accidents. We had a gentleman that was killed in the San Francisco Bay Area here at the Vacaville Airport, Nut Tree Airport, around Christmas time a few years ago. They found him many hours later. There's nobody else around the airport, and they found a dead body next to the airplane. So he apparently had killed himself while trying to hand prop the aircraft by himself. I mean, I'm sympathetic that there are aircraft that don't have, starter motors and that they do have to be hand propped. I'm also sympathetic that there are a lot of people who have been properly trained to do that and feel comfortable, hand propping not only those airplanes, but other, airplanes that do have starter motors, but which they find themselves, not working for some particular reason. I'm not so sure that hand propping, a 310 horsepower engine makes a whole lot of sense. It's going to require a heck of a lot more force to swing that prop to get it to start. Not only that, if you have the throttle misset even slightly, you're going to have a lot more power coming out of the airplane, a much greater chance that it's going to get away from you. So, boy, to me, I couldn't see myself in that situation. If I had a Cirrus sitting there that wouldn't start, I wouldn't be going flying.
Absolutely. And, here's the part that really gets me about this one. It sort of grinds my gears, if you will. But when I watch this video, it's bad enough that the guy was doing that, right? But there was another person inside that airplane. And then that thing went careening down a ramp area into a hangar. I mean, the amount of damage that could have caused, the amount of people that could have been taken out, if that thing had gone into the hangar and hit a jet full of fuel, it could have exploded an entire building. Sure, that's obviously the doomsday scenario, but the amount of disregard, not just for your own personal safety, but for literally everybody around that airport. There's a chance that thing could have, if that thing had gone hard enough, I've seen it happen to a model airplane where the guy flipped the prop, lost control of it, and the aircraft just took off right through the ramp area and then just went flying off into nowhere. And I suppose it's possible that airplane could have escaped the hangars and actually just gone careening across the airport into a neighborhood on the other side. So to me, it's bad enough that you would endanger yourself that way, but to have that much disregard for others, that doesn't compute for me.
Yeah, I think sometimes people in the moment encounter a situation that maybe they haven't really fully thought out before, and so they improvise on the spot. And I got to tell you, I think on-the-spot improvisation when you're doing flying is a good formula for getting yourself in trouble. I think these, spur-of-the-moment decisions, oh man, they can really get you in trouble. I read an article written by a surgeon who had become a pilot later in life, and he said he takes the same approach to flying that he takes to teaching a younger surgeon a new operation. He said he asked them to write down every possible thing that could go wrong, and then next to it write what action they will take when any of those things go wrong. He said that for aviation, he came up with 69 different things that could go wrong. And my first reaction was, boy, I can't even think of that many myself. But my second reaction was, what a really excellent plan. Now, I think it's pretty easy to envision. The plane doesn't start. Yeah, that's certainly a pretty easy to guess, problem that you might run into. And so you ought to have thought that out ahead of time and not be improvising on the spot.
Yeah, I completely agree. Anytime you're going to make a move with something, you're going to set in motion a whole new set of circumstances, whether you're on the air traffic side or the pilot side or the maintenance side of things, or you're a doctor. And you need to know what you're playing with when you're going to make a move like that. And writing down everything that could possibly go wrong, that's kind of brilliant. I like it.
I also wonder if sometimes pilots don't really fully realize that as general aviation pilots, we really need to accept that there are going to be times that we're going to be inconvenienced and that our plan A for the day is not going to necessarily follow its way through, and that using brute force to try and still achieve plan A may not be the right idea. And I have kind of a rule of two, and I use it in a couple of different ways, but in this particular case, my rule of two is when I get to the second thing that's just not going right, it's like, oh, I'm out of here. I'm done. I'm quitting. I'm stopping. I don't want to get to that third thing that's not going just quite right. And I think that, this gentleman might have thought ahead of time. My guess is he probably hadn't hand propped the Cirrus before. Maybe he had hand propped other aircraft. But I have to believe that, this would be a pretty hard aircraft to hand prop. Now, first few times I watched the video, I didn't see that second person, kind of behind the airplane, kind of rolling on the ground. Somewhere I read that was the pilot's girlfriend. So I don't know if she was, in the airplane and the controls and she scrambled out when it took off or what. But I'm thinking that's a relationship that may be in trouble.
Yeah, I think that's probably going to be a telling moment for the two of them.
Yeah. Or maybe it's a bonding moment. Boy, we got closer after that moment.
Yeah, I've seen stranger things, I guess.
Probably so. Hey, so you mentioned model airplanes. You're talking about flying RC?
Yeah, that's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, and so you've done that for a while?
I did it when I was younger. I haven't done it in probably 20 years, but when I was younger, that's what I did before I flew real airplanes.
And I took that up about 4 years ago. Not that I had ever been interested in it, but my wife was. So it's something we do together. And you were talking about, a model airplane that went off on its own. Probably the most amazing set of circumstances that happened at our local RC field. And I just wish I had been there to see it. There was a gentleman in the past year who had a fairly large biplane. It was a Pitts and gasoline-powered engine. And as he started it, the airplane got away from him. But not only that, as the airplane got away from him, his transmitter fell off his neck and the strap of the transmitter looped around the tail. This airplane took off with his transmitter bouncing along the runway. Oh, no. And so he had no way to control this airplane because his transmitter was now attached to the airplane. And so apparently it did some maneuvers before it crashed into the river, which goes right adjacent to our model field. But I was just amazed at how, when one thing goes wrong, sometimes it's not the only thing that goes wrong. Other things can go wrong as well, too. And that kind of brings me back to the rule of two. It's like, when things are not going right, it may not be your day. It may be time to just stop right there.
Yeah. Wow. Couldn't agree more. Well, Max, this has been a ton of fun. I'm glad we got a chance to kind of talk about this. I think it's pretty neat that we actually came from a long time ago, some similar backgrounds in a different time. And, your insights into the way these Cirrus incidents went down is just, it's so much fun to listen to you talk about this. And I'm a fan of your podcast as well. I listen to each and every episode, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for asking. And we'll have to have you on my show sometime.
Well, I can't wait. That'll be so much fun.
Well, thanks so much.
Man, talking about this stuff with Max is so much fun, and don't worry, it won't be the last time. But until then, you can always check out more Max over at maxtrescott.com or aviationnewstalk.com too. And if you have feedback for me or for Max, make sure to head over to podcastingonaplane.com, where you can contact me in a number of different ways, including email, and of course my favorite, which is to record a message. You just click on the little tab that always pops up to record your feedback for me, and you can do it straight from your phone. No equipment, app, or experience necessary. Real quick, I want to make it real clear again that this episode was tough for me to make just because I really don't want to judge another controller's actions, and I don't want to armchair quarterback the situation or the pilots. And I hope that you guys take this as a case study. Nothing more, nothing less. But it's so important that we share these stories and that we talk about them to hopefully prevent something like this ever happening in the future. A couple of final points to consider and keep in the back of your mind as you go about your flying endeavors after this is, number one, air traffic control is in fact a two-way street. I know it seems like a one-way street most of the time, but it really isn't. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, you're asked to do something you're not comfortable with, please use your PIC authority to say something. And that's point number two. You're the PIC, the pilot in command. That might be the heaviest sentence in this whole aviation thing. That means you're the final authority as to the operation of your aircraft. If you're asked to do something that you don't want to do, please say something. And also, you can always provide an alternative. If I can't do this, but I can do that, well, then just say so. Also, number three. Everything you do affects others. Just look at that hand prop video one more time and you'll see what I mean. It's bad enough he was doing it for himself, but just think about how bad that could have been for everybody else around. Let's just leave it at that. So if you're interested in talking about any of this further, or you want to gain an edge in your aviation endeavors, don't forget, we can always do a remote one-on-one training and mentoring session. Go over to podcastingonaplane.com/contact and let me know when you want to do it. We'll schedule it up. And if you don't want to talk, but you find value in the podcast and you want to support the show, go over to podcastingonaplane.com/support. And you can see future goals for the show and find out how you can become a valued supporter. If money's tight, hey, that's cool. I understand. Just head over to iTunes maybe and leave a positive review. It's free, and it'll go a long way to help me improve the show. And it'll also help others find the podcast. And most importantly, chances are I'll read it with your name on a future episode. Well, that's all for now. Thanks again for listening. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between podcasting on a plane and the FAA. Also, while I am a CFI, I'm not your CFI. Nor am I your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice. It's not legal counsel, and it's definitely not flight instruction. If you are in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.